Hey there. So the podcast is currently on an extended hiatus so that I can write my next book and work on some other exciting projects. But while we're away, I hope you'll enjoy this fan favorite episode from the archives. If you want brand new content to help you make peace with food and heal from diet culture, come sign up for my free weekly newsletter at christyharrison.com/newsletter, where I answer a weekly listener question. And as always, if you join my Intuitive Eating Fundamentals course at christyharrison.com/course, you get access to our exclusive monthly Q&A podcast where I answer all your new questions. Just go to christyharrison.com/newsletter and christyharrison.com/course to sign up, or click the links in the episode description. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of the book Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available wherever books are sold. Join me here every week as I interview interesting people from all different backgrounds about their paths toward peace with food in their bodies. And by the way, on this show, we bleep out diet culture stuff like weight and calorie numbers, but we don't censor swear words or other adult language, so listener discretion is advised.
Anti-diet revolution, we're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych.
Hey there, welcome to episode 257 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with body image researcher Nadia Craddock about body image beyond just body size and weight, her experiences in inpatient eating disorder treatment, colorism and its harmful effects on body image, how to push back against body ideals, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment. It's a really good one, but just a trigger warning/content warning for the fact that Nadia describes some pretty traumatic experiences she had in long-term inpatient treatment for anorexia. I think it's really important to share these stories to help raise awareness and prevent these things from happening to others. But I know that if you're deep in an eating disorder yourself, or if you're in that place of disordered eating of feeling like you're quote unquote not sick enough to deserve help, which isn't true, but which your eating disorder wants you to believe, then it might be triggering to hear that part of Nadia's story. So if that's the case for you, you can skip that section. She starts talking about that time in her life at around the 33-minute mark, and we move on to other topics at around 51 minutes. You can skip those parts if you need to for your own mental health and still get so much other great content out of this interview. So before we dive into that, though, it is time for Ask Food Psych. This week's question is from a listener named Jamie who writes, "Hi, Christy. This summer, before I had ever listened to your podcast, my doctor recommended an elimination diet to address my health concerns, which included acne, IBS, headaches, depression, etc. Trusting my doctor, I did not do a lot of research on elimination diets outside of the reading she specifically recommended. Thus, I embarked on this diet wholeheartedly, removing a huge array of foods from my diet. I did this strictly for a number of weeks. I have never in my entire life, I'm 27, been on a quote-unquote diet to lose weight. Losing weight had truly never been a focus for me and was not something that took up much of my time or energy. I was happy in my body and did not have a lot of stress or anxiety around eating. However, this changed on the elimination diet. While the quote-unquote goal of the diet at the outset was not to lose weight, by the end it became my sole focus. It was impossible for me to eat enough on this diet because it was so restrictive, and I lost a lot of weight extremely quickly. I went back to my doctor to discuss how to reintroduce the foods that I had eliminated and how to watch for various quote-unquote symptoms and identify the quote-unquote bad foods so that I would be able to keep the weight off and remain symptom-free. I would like to note here that this was bullshit anyway, because my digestive system had gotten progressively worse over the course of the elimination diet, with severe simultaneous diarrhea and constipation and constant bloating. She literally told me that I actually, quote, never needed to reintroduce any of those foods because I was getting all of my required nutrition from the foods that I was still allowed to eat, unquote. This idea was truly devastating to me, and it was when I first started suspecting that something was not quite right. Eventually, I found your podcast, learned about how elimination diets are fucked up bullshit, and now here I am. Now, although I have reintroduced almost all food groups and I'm trying to return to normalcy, I'm still restricting calories and have found myself obsessed with my body and trying to maintain its new weight. People, literal strangers, friends, and family, now feel like they can comment on my body, basically telling me how fat I was before and how much they like the new me. I'm truly so sad and frankly pissed off that I have been put in this situation by my doctor, a woman I have trusted with my health for many years. I went from having a normal and healthy relationship with my body and with food to having extreme anxiety regarding eating and gaining weight. I'm embarrassed and ashamed to have ever gone on this diet. All this background for a simple question. What, if anything, can I say to my doctor to let her know how upset I am that she put me on an elimination diet? I truly do not want her to continue recommending this to her other patients and think it is important for her to know how harmful that elimination diets can be. Is it my responsibility to tell her, or should I just get a new doctor and move on with my life and continue trying to recover? Thank you for your response if you choose to give one, and thank you for making this your life's work. I believe you have contributed to so much healing in this world, and I am so grateful to have found your podcast to help me through my current struggle. I feel so much sorrow for the people and the stories you share with us, and I hope we can all strive toward a future where we no longer have to surrender our lives and our happiness to diet culture. So thanks, Jamie, for that great question and for your kind words. And before I answer, just my usual disclaimer that these answers and this podcast in general are for informational and educational purposes only, aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice, and don't constitute a provider-patient relationship. So first of all, Jamie, I just want to send you so much compassion for your situation. I can hear that you're feeling really both angry at your doctor and down on yourself for getting into this position. And I just want to offer that it's completely understandable and not your fault. So please don't beat yourself up over this because you're not alone. You know, it's so common these days for people to get into this situation when so many doctors are prescribing elimination diets willy-nilly and frankly, you know, being pretty clueless in how they prescribe them. And, you know, it sounds like that is the case for your doctor. It sounds like she's pretty clueless because it's so irresponsible of her to tell you that you never need to reintroduce any of the foods you eliminated. And it's just flat out wrong, you know? So I can really understand being angry at her. And I think that energy of being angry at her and being angry at diet culture in general is really where the anger belongs, right? Not being angry at yourself, because that's not helpful and you deserve compassion and support for this. You know, you are just doing what your doctor told you to do. That's the reason we go to doctors in the first place, right? Is to get their advice and to hopefully get them to help us with our situation. So she told you something that was just uninformed. And, you know, really elimination diets are super problematic anyway, as you've heard from listening to the podcast, right? But even if they're going to be used in a therapeutic way, they should never be continued long term, right? They're only intended to figure out what foods you're quote unquote intolerant to. And of course, I put that in quotation marks because it's often really hard to figure out whether there's a genuine sensitivity to particular foods versus a nocebo effect, where your beliefs and anxieties about a particular food or particular foods in this case actually causes physical symptoms. Another issue with elimination diets, which may not be the case for you, Jamie, since it sounds like you didn't have disordered eating really before the elimination diet, but for the many other people who do, who might be listening, I just want to mention this. It's important to know that your body can develop sensitivities to particular foods temporarily because of disordered eating. Because of the way that disordered eating wreaks havoc on your digestive system, on your gut microbiome. And those temporary sensitivities often disappear once you heal from the disordered eating and the gut bacteria balance out. And so it's really important not to stay on elimination diets long term. But also, even if you do, you know, go through an elimination diet and identify quote unquote sensitivities, They might not actually be long-term sensitivities to particular foods. They may be caused in the first place by a disordered pattern of eating that will normalize and regulate once you heal your relationship with food. And so then introducing back in those foods that you thought you were sensitive to will be an important part of your recovery. I talked a bit about all of that in episode 175 with Marcy Evans, and I definitely recommend checking that out for Jamie if you haven't heard it, but also for anyone else who's listening who's in this boat of trying to navigate IBS and other digestive issues while also struggling with disordered eating. But getting back to your specific issue, Jamie, this is a great example of why doctors really need to be educated about disordered eating. Because even people who don't have pre-existing disordered eating can easily fall into it when they're put on an elimination diet. And we don't know ahead of time who's susceptible to that. So in my view, that really means that elimination diets should be used only as a very last resort, if at all. And in many cases, especially for people who have known predispositions to disordered eating, I think it's really never a good idea to start an elimination diet. There are so many other things that can be effective for IBS and other digestive issues, equally if not more effective than elimination diets, like stress reduction techniques, gut-directed hypnotherapy. And Marcy and I talked about that in episode 175, so I definitely recommend, again, checking that out. Another important thing that all medical professionals need to know about disordered eating is that there are biological, psychological, and sociological issues at play, all of which can be kicked off by the restriction and deprivation of elimination diets, or really any diet. So energy restriction can cause changes in the brain that drive further disordered eating and obsessive thoughts about food, which in our culture tends to be accompanied by corresponding thoughts of weight and fears about gaining weight. That's the sociological part, which also includes, by the way, getting praise from people for losing weight, because they've all been socialized in diet culture too. And just a brief refresher that diet culture is a system of beliefs that worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue, promotes weight loss as a means of attaining higher status, demonizes some foods while elevating others, and oppresses people who don't match its supposed picture of health. And all of those things are at play in the situation you described, Jamie, right? You have your friends and family and total strangers complimenting your body because they've been socialized to worship thinness and equate it to health and moral virtue, right? And see weight loss as higher status for you. And so they're praising those things without understanding the real harm that this diet has done to you and that this weight loss has done to you. Another thing that I see a lot in diet culture these days under its new guise as the wellness diet, which is pretending to be all about health and wellness, but really it's just diet culture in its sneaky new form, is that a lot of random people on the internet, as well as some healthcare providers, unfortunately, especially those in the quote-unquote alternative or quote-unquote integrative world, and I'm not sure, Jamie, if your physician is in that world, but maybe that's, a good clue to potentially look for a second opinion outside of that world, because a lot of people in that world, again, not all providers, but many, or certainly a significant percentage of providers in that world are making these sweeping connections between all of these disparate, unrelated symptoms, like in your case, acne, IBS, headaches, depression, etc. And they're saying that if you just eliminate certain foods, all of those symptoms and issues will disappear. Right? It's a version of the idea that you can just take this magic pill and all your problems will go away. Although ironically, the food cure is positioned as the alternative to quote-unquote popping pills, which is looked down upon in the wellness diet, even though it's pretty much the exact same thing, right? You're just, eliminating foods as your quote-unquote magic pill. I talk about this a bit more in my book, Anti-Diet, where I have a whole chapter devoted to the wellness diet, which I call A Diet by Another Name. And I also talked about these issues with Alan Levinovitz in episode 94 of Food Psych, which I highly recommend checking out. Alan is a religious scholar, and so he has a great perspective on how eliminating particular foods has come to be seen as a panacea and how dietary theories are kind of functioning as a modern form of religion. Super fascinating. So in terms of where to go from here, Jamie, I want to just underline first that the symptoms you describe are very disordered, and it can be really hard, if not impossible, to recover on your own when you're experiencing behaviors and thoughts like this. So I would recommend getting help from an experienced treatment team. You can look at christyharrison.com/providers for a list of the dietitians, therapists, and medical doctors I recommend for all types of disordered eating recovery. And I know that many, if not all of them, are doing virtual sessions right now because of COVID-19. Many of them also offer sliding scales as well if finances are an issue for you. So I would definitely check that out. christyharrison.com/providers is the link, and we'll put that in the show notes for this episode as well. If you can't find anyone on my list who has availability for whatever reason, you can also check out nationaleatingdisorders.org for other referrals. Just make sure to cross-reference or talk to the providers ahead of time so that you know they're health at every size informed, weight inclusive, they're not going to body shame you or co-sign your weight loss or anything like that, because unfortunately that does still exist in the eating disorder field. And finally, as to whether to say anything to your doctor, you absolutely could share with her some of what I shared here with you if you feel like it would be helpful to express your anger and give her some of the facts and maybe have a chance of saving some of her other patients from the same fate down the line. But I think you also have to be aware that it might not really land with her, or she might even respond in a defensive way. And so it's important to figure out for you whether you're in a place to be able to handle that, or if it would just make you feel worse and kind of exacerbate the situation, right? So I think a good way to start is just to write her a letter with no intention of sending it, either offline on paper, like in your journal, or in a Word document with your internet turned off, your email turned off, so that there's no temptation to hit send right away. And just say everything you want to say. Get it out on paper, get it out in a document, and then see how you feel, right? It'll probably be pretty cathartic to just get the words out, but maybe you'll also have some anxiety of seeing it all written out or some like vulnerability hangover feelings. And so just kind of notice what comes up for you and let that letter sit for a few days. Then you can come back to it and decide whether you want to send it. And eventually, maybe, with fresh eyes, you'll see that it feels important to send, or certain sections feel important to send. And you can just keep the rest as a journal entry just for yourself. So, give it some time, give it some space. Don't feel like you have to do it all at once, but start processing your feelings by writing them out. Or if you're more of a auditory person, or you can't write for whatever reason, you could speak it into a voice text on your phone or in another program. And again, turn off your internet so you're not tempted to send it, right? But just get the words out in a voice memo if that helps you to clarify your thoughts. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you again for that great question. And for anyone listening who wants to submit their own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, you can go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. Then if you want to ask me all of your questions every month and have me answer them in a monthly Q&A that I do just for course participants, you can come join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. There I answer questions every month, and you can also listen to hundreds of answers I've given to other people already in the course so that you can work through all of the little sticking points and weird nuances that come up with intuitive eating and really put it into practice in your life. The course also has 13 modules of audio and written content to give you the fundamentals, the basics of intuitive eating, and go into depth and kind of troubleshoot some of the ways that I see people tend to get stuck with the principles, turning it into a diet, right? The hunger and fullness diet, or the don't eat emotionally diet, as Isabel Fox and Duke calls it. And that's not what intuitive eating is. So all of my content in this course is geared towards helping you see the ways that you might be turning intuitive eating into a diet, or still just holding on to the diet mentality in general, and moving away from that and getting, rooting out those diety behaviors and beliefs so that you can reject them and let them go and make way for a more healing, intuitive relationship with food. I also have a private community forum in the course just for course participants, where you can support each other and connect with people around the world, hundreds of people around the world doing this course and on this anti-diet path. Plus, I'm in there along with my wonderful team, giving support and guidance too. If you're ready to break free from diet culture and reclaim the life it stole from you, along with a wonderful community of other folks who are on the same path, you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by ThreadUp. When it comes to a major overhaul of your closet, there's only one place where you can shop all your favorite brands at once: ThredUp. ThredUp is the world's largest online thrift store with up to 90% off of estimated retail. Shop from over 45,000 brands for women's or kids' clothing, handbags, shoes, and more for a fraction of the price. It's thrifting with the convenience of online shopping. I also love the fact that you can customize your search by your size, including plus sizes, and they have a huge array of styles and budgets so you can find the best deals instantly. I recommend ThredUp all the time to clients and to anyone looking to swap out old clothes that you don't wear anymore for new ones that look great and fit the body that you have right now. Get the styles you love at a fraction of the price. You'll look and feel good with ThredUp. And for Food Psych listeners, here's an exclusive offer just for you. Get an extra 30% off your first order at thredup.com/foodpsych. That's thredup.com/FOODPSYCH for 30% off your first order. thredup.com/foodpsych for an extra 30% off today. Terms apply. And now just a quick public service announcement. If you live in the US, please vote. There's never been a more important election for determining the future of our democracy. And I'm not just talking about the presidency, which of course is super important to vote for, but I'm also talking about Congress and the state and local elections, because those matter a lot for making sure good legislation can get passed and enacted, and for determining the future of the courts and voting rights and climate change and affordable healthcare and so many other issues that I know are important to you. And the stakes couldn't be higher when it comes to healthcare because the Affordable Care Act and reproductive rights are very much at stake in this election. Millions of people like me and many of you have pre-existing conditions that would make us ineligible for health insurance if the Affordable Care Act gets dismantled. So we need to turn out in this election like we've never turned out before, so that there can be no ambiguity, no disputing the results of this election, all up and down the ticket. If you've already voted, thank you so much. And if you still need to vote, you can go to votesaveamerica.com to learn about the options in your state and make a plan. That's votesaveamerica.com. And now, without any further ado, let's go to my conversation with Nadia Craddock. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
Okay, let's get right into it. So I think there's like a couple of running jokes in my family that about me and food that probably sum up my relationship with food when I was a child, probably up until the age of 11. So first up, I was very particular with what I ate, and it was really orientated around appearance and presentation and maybe a bit about texture. So I wouldn't eat anything that was broken, for example. So that was like a no-go. I'd send it back to the kitchen. I also really liked crackers with butter, just very plain, really liked it, but was also very particular about how the butter was spread, that it was spread evenly over all four, over the surface area of the cracker. So again, if it wasn't spread all over, which was the saying, that it wasn't all over, again, it would be sent back. I wouldn't be happy with it, wasn't into it. And there's lots of little things like that. So again, if the bread wasn't cut straight, again, wasn't interested. I think it was very much I deserved better. I wasn't going to be fussing around with something that wasn't just right. So I think there was that element that I was very particular. But it wasn't that I didn't like food. I liked the things I liked. I was just particular. So another running joke that still gets surfaced every now and again is I don't know quite how old I was, if I was 3 or 4, but when I was asked what I wanted for Christmas, I was very earnest in my answer that I really wanted sausages. They were my favorite food at the time, probably something we didn't have super often. And when it was quizzed and be no, you can, they said, we're asking about toys or presents or gifts or whatever. It was but what about the sausages? I was really into knowing that we were going to have that as an absolute. That's really what I wanted. So kind of maybe a little bit obsessive, very picky. And then I think the third joke would always be about how long I'd make something last. So if there was a treat and we had long car journeys, I remember being in the car with friends and their snacks for the journey would be gone in 2 minutes. And I was hadn't even barely started. So it was kind of, I think I used to play with food, I think was probably the part of that. bit is that it was kind of fun, and I was a bit indifferent in how I saw food, I guess. But I would say, yeah, growing up, that was there were like the three main things that would really feature quite a lot in terms of how I interacted with food. And I think probably thinking about it in a slightly more reflective way, I think in some ways, I think food was a way I could rebel a little bit and protest a little bit. It was like my protest ground, where if I didn't want to do something, that it was an easy thing I could say no to without really getting into any kind of trouble. But none of it was a huge problem or a huge issue. It was kind of just like quirky, I think, more than anything in terms of how I like played out. But that's, yeah, very much of a child. And then I think getting a bit older and like going to secondary school, things started shifting a little bit. And I remember I used to do a lot of activities, and I always have, and I think I still do now, like barring lockdown. I like to be very busy and I do lots of things, and especially as a child. And I don't know if this is kind of, I don't want to be like unfair to my parents, but I don't know if this is with my mum being like, it's part of that, the immigrant mentality of like the opportunities I had as a child were just so vast compared to I think what she might have had. And so I think she was very keen for me to do things, and then also I loved them. So every night of the week I was doing, one night would be swimming, another night would be dancing, another night would be drama. Like there would be like an activity on like every evening. And I think so what I did and how food came into it was like food was always secondary to like the fun that was to be had. And then I think by the time I went to secondary school, I went to a secondary school outside of my neighborhood. So it was an all-girls school, and we certainly weren't poor growing up, but we weren't in an affluent area. And the school that I went to was in an affluent area. I used to get 2 buses to go to school. And I think I was conscious of not having as much money as my friends. And I think one of the ways I felt I could fit in was by having the same amount of money at the weekends, but I didn't really want to ask my parents. So very quickly it turned into like my lunch money would be my weekend money. So I would like pocket my lunch money, and then that would be my weekend money. And then I don't know how old I was when it also transitioned to like maybe only getting 1 bus instead of 2 and walking the other journey, to then save a bit of money from the bus journey, to then have it again, like adding to my weekend money. God knows what we did at the weekend at 12, 13, but whatever it was, whatever everyone else was doing, I wanted to be doing too, didn't want to be left out. So I remember doing that. And I think at that age, 11, 12, 13, I don't think anything was like problematic in a diet culture-y type way, although I was skipping meals and doing things a bit weird, but it wasn't the motivation at that time that really stood out was like having the spending money to like kind of do the fun things. And so like there wasn't any like weirdness or like distress around it at all. So like if, you know, one day I did have lunch, it was fine. If one day I got a lift to school, again, that was fine. It was like none of those things were things I felt I had to do. And yeah, as I say, I don't remember, like it didn't feel problematic at that time, but I think it taught me what I could do as I got older. I think then it became like, oh yeah, I can skip meals and I can do this and I can keep going without really eating that much or fueling myself that much. It's like I can do it, and it's like something that's quite, probably at the time felt quite exciting and quite like, oh, I can do something. So that was all kind of probably up to the age of like 14, 15. But I think it's hard to see where things changed. But by the time I was 16, I used to dance a lot. So I did lots of different activities, as I said before, and I carried that all through, like all the way through secondary school. But dance was my favorite thing. And how like the dance school kind of worked is that by the time you get to 15, 16, you're working with like the younger kids, and you're like a role model to the babies, you know, to the 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, and you would teach them little bits, and you would encourage them for competitions, and you'd take them under your wing. It was like that. It was very much like a family type culture. And then I think there was some concern about my size expressed by some of the parents,
like about being
very small. And then I remember my dance teacher at the time then was like asked me about food, eating, whatever, and I think kind of dismissed it. And I think it's hard to kind of piece it all together, but I think so. I'm half Asian, half white. So my dad's white British, and my mum is Indian and grew up in Malaysia. And my mum is naturally very, very small, and that's just how she's built. Like she barely scrapes 5 foot, although she'll tell you she's like 5'2". But she's very, very small. And again, I think like it being the 90s, early 2000s, there was all, like being thin was the absolute, that all that like heroin chic type thing. So, and then I think I was quite conscious of being like one of the only non-white kids at school. And I think I kind of very much hid under the fact that I was thin because I was Asian. Like that's like the good thing about being Asian. I kind of hid behind that stereotype, although that wasn't maybe necessarily my actual build. And I think I convinced myself so much of that when people questioned me for my weight, it didn't seem right. Like it didn't seem right. And I think even to my mum, it didn't seem right because comparatively, I was bigger than her when she was growing up, for example, because I was taller and broader. So I think it probably took her by surprise when my size, weight, etc. was questioned at 16 by my dance teacher at the time. I think it took her by surprise. I was very dismissive of it. But then I think it came to a head, and then I had to go to the doctor to then get my weight checked or something. And then it was at the time when it was like DSM-4 or whatever, where so there was a weight threshold for anorexia. So then my BMI was quite a bit under that threshold. So then that was kind of a bit of a weird point. But then again, I think I was still very dismissive of it. So then I, had assessments and bits and pieces, and then was diagnosed at, I think I was still 16 at the time. I don't think I'd gone into sixth form. But so, yeah, I was diagnosed with anorexia, but didn't really identify with it. I kind of thought it was a lot of fuss about nothing. But because of dancing, I had to monitor it in a way that, because I knew I was being looked at in that way. So was very much kind of quite performative, I think, in terms of being like, I'm not this, I'm fine. And then it's how things then unraveled. And I think probably up until 16, 17, even 18, I think I went to treatment. I did some outpatient treatment. I did some day patient treatment. I was, again, very not interested, very dismissive of the whole thing, for that classic denial element. And I think I kind of remember seeing other people in treatment and was just like, I am absolutely not like you at all. I couldn't really relate. I wasn't really interested in what any clinician had to say to me. And then and I would skip appointments, and I was just not really into it. And I think I was so convinced in my own rhetoric around what I was doing and why and how I was. And I was, just like, I need to be focused. And I wanted to be good at school, and I was doing all my activities, and it was kind of something that was getting in the way, but I kind of had to do it because otherwise I wouldn't be able to dance anymore. My dance teacher was quite strict and was kind of like this needs to be monitored, otherwise we can't go ahead. So I was like, no, I was like, okay, fine, I would do it. But it all just felt something that I was like, this is all a bit extra. But I think it's very interesting, looking back and seeing how I thought about it then. And I think I wasn't at that time, probably, all the way up until 18. I'm trying to think if I was really engaging in some of the classic behaviors. I don't think I was weighing myself, apart from when I was getting weighed by clinicians. I don't think I was counting calories. I obviously was eating in a very problematic way, but I wasn't doing some things that I associated with anorexia that I had heard about and seen other people do. And I was like, well, I don't do any of these things, so therefore I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem in the same way. And I think I still had a good group of friends. I still did fun things. I still had quite a full life up until that point. And so it just didn't really seem a problem. It just seemed a bit more of a headache, but I kind of went along with it. And then I think, so I went for, then I think there's all the things that come in when you're 17, 18, in terms of applying for university and things. And I had an interview at Cambridge for law, funnily enough, because I always think that's a joke. I cannot imagine myself being a lawyer today. But anyway, that's what I wanted to do at the time. Some of my friends were applying to do law. It kind of seemed a good fit at the time. And it sounded smart. And again, I don't know if that fits back into not that my parents were very, I don't think I ever felt very pressured by my parents, but it sounded good and it fits in that lawyer, doctor, engineer mold of, the kind of jobs that you want to do. So I was going to do law, but I went for this interview at Cambridge, and I remember taking off my coat, and the woman, there was a couple of people on the panel for the interview, and the woman winced. And I was just like, oh. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. I completely bombed the interview because I didn't really want to do law. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was reasonably good at most things. I wasn't exceptional at anything, but I was reasonably okay. So it kind of felt like a good, okay, it seems like a smart choice. But anyway, bombed the interview. Remember this woman wincing, and then I obviously didn't get in. And I think that was probably the first big knock that I'd ever really had. And then I think from then, the food thing became more of a controlling thing, or I consciously remember it being a controlling thing. I think it probably was a controlling thing much before that point, but I think that's when I kind of remembered digging my heels in a little bit with it. And then over the next couple of years, where different things didn't work out, or there was, I was in a couple of relationships that were really not very healthy. I didn't end up going to university at all. I ended up being in and out of treatment, and the more I was in treatment, the worse I got, I think. And then I think because my life started getting smaller, I think then it gave more space for my eating disorder to get bigger. And I think where there were some not so great relationships, and my friends were off at uni, I was a bit stuck in what I was doing. And then by the age of 22 was when I had my worst admission. So I think before then it was it felt a bit more manageable. But the last time I was 22, I ended up being in hospital for just under a year. And I think it's been interesting to reflect back on it over different points. But I think I know I needed that admission because things had got so bad by that point. But I think even now, I think I'm still recovering from some of the trauma that goes along with being an inpatient for that amount of time. Whereas, I think the eating problem feels a lot more resolved, but I think there's some of that kind of, and I don't know. I think obviously eating disorder treatment is really, really difficult. And I think being on the other side of it, and, I don't know, going to the International Conference for Eating Disorders and some of these academic conferences and listening to how people talk about treatment, and I can imagine, I know how I was. I know how I am today, and so then factor in an eating disorder in it. I know that I wouldn't have been a very easy patient, but I also, so I understand it's it must be the most challenging job, but it felt so punitive, and so and I think it just, I don't know, it's so interesting. It's you're also you're at the worst point in your life, and then also you're surrounded by another 18 people who are at the worst point in their life, and how their eating disorder manifests, what other comorbidities they have, all the different life factors that they have, and how they then present and behave and interact. It's the most wild experience, and I think I was in some ways quite naive to some of the things that happened with other people. Because again, even kind of going back to the first times I was in treatment, I always felt, I was no, I'm not as, I don't know, I just don't feel as distressed as, I don't, I'd see people crying. I was no, I'm fine. I'm fine. What do you need me to do? I'll do it. Whatever. Let's go. Come on, let's move. Let's keep going. Whereas, I don't know. I think I always felt and I guess it would be interesting. I think probably a lot of people feel they're different to everyone else, but I think everyone else is very, everyone's different in those circumstances, and what's led you to that circumstance is a whole different factor of things that have got you there. But I still think I was still quite naive to some of the things that happened during that time, and there's no escape from it. Like there was no option to leave.
You were there at your parents' behest and against your will, or you couldn't, even if you were on board with it, you couldn't have left if you wanted to.
No, so like throughout that whole year, like there was no like I the number of times, so you have like your board rounds and then you have like these big discussions with all of your team, and the amount of time when I was like, no, I think I'm ready, I can go, and then they bring out all the section papers and everyone gets very serious all of a sudden, and then you're like, again, it very much feels that you're spoken to like a child, everyone knows what's best for you, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm not allowed outside. And in that year, I think the first, and it's been interesting, obviously, going through lockdown with the whole COVID-19 crisis and some of the parallels with that. But in that first 3 months I was there in that admission, I wasn't allowed outside at all. Like even to step outside into the garden was like not allowed. Like I hadn't earned the right to do that yet. Because and I don't know. It's hard to tell. Obviously, I was very unwell. I don't know what the medical risk was involved in terms of me going outside or not. I have no idea. Like it's hard to tell. But it was just like it's so fascinating in some ways to think about it now, however many years on, that was like a whole situation. But
sounds like a very dehumanizing experience too.
Yeah, I think so. And I think by the point I was there at that point, I in terms of how human I was, I don't know, in terms of like my personality, all my activities, all the life things, a lot of that had gone by the time I ended up in hospital. So it wasn't like that stripped everything away from me at that time, but it certainly didn't help build anything. And I think, again, the longer I was there, and sometimes you could get yourself in a really good headspace, but then someone new comes to the ward and it just like turns the whole ward upside down. And then it's like really hard then to keep the blinkers on to kind of be on track. And I think that first 6 months, I think, and probably why I ended up staying there so long and couldn't leave, was that I just couldn't get on board with it. And I just was it took me a long time, because I was also like, I just don't know how I could do what they wanted me to do. It felt a lot more difficult, whereas in the past, in different forms of treatment, I could do what they wanted me to do. When I left, I would kind of go back to old habits, but I could do what they wanted me to do at the time. In that last admission and that long admission, I couldn't do what they were asking me to do. It just felt too much, and I just couldn't see the point. It just felt too overwhelming, I think. And then I think I just reacted to how I was spoken to, it's funny. I think it gets a bit like kind of petty, and it's weird like how people compete. But I was like, why is this person got a different set of rules to what I have to do? Like I don't get it. I just couldn't get over some of that. And then I don't know, it was a very strange time.
Do you think there was a certain kind of social contagion to it or something, where you were getting ideas of things to do from other people? Because I know that's something that clients of mine have spoken about, and I've seen in some of my interactions with treatment centers too.
Yeah, I think there was definitely an element of that. And it's interesting because sometimes you could see things and you're like, that is what that person is doing, is what on earth is that person doing? Like that's nonsense. Like that, I can remember having those thoughts with certain behaviors and finding it almost funny, and was just like, what is going on? Obviously it's not funny, but it's like, it's how I was able to like process the whole situation. But there were, I think it's hard not to pick up on what people are doing and the like little sneaky tricks. And if you feel like everyone's doing it, and then I guess it was hard not to even if you were kind of, it wasn't necessarily intentional. And that sometimes you would see people who were, and I just remember there were some really young people on the board that time, and you could see these girls watching what these other people were doing. And I think that was something that actually was long-term beneficial to me, because I remember there were two very young people on that ward who they were minors. They were 13, 14. It was an adult ward. They shouldn't have been on that ward. It was like an acute ward. I just remember this one girl, and every like different patient's behaviors she would pick up on and like imitate. And it was like, you could see it. And when you see it so plainly and you see it with a child, it really it just felt so uncomfortable in that way. So
like you didn't want to be a person to give her ideas.
Yeah, and I think actually, I'm trying to think when she would have when she came during like how long I was there. But I think actually having it did give me a bit of a push to be like, you know what, I'm not doing. I don't want to be giving those children on the ward. I don't know. It just felt more uncomfortable. And I think I was more aware of how I was behaving because of how people would, or like how a child would perceive me, you know, and like what implications that would have for that child. I think I was kind of aware of that and kind of wanted to protect her in particular in a way, because I just remember being so shocked at some of the things that would happen. And yeah, I think that was an element. And like the other element of people being there who, and you'd see the same people in treatment also, that's the other factor. And you kind of see the kind of revolving door effect and women there in their 60s again. And that was kind of, it's very, in some ways, so although I don't think I wasn't better immediately after that admission by any stretch, but it did make me really think about what I wanted and I think it was the first time I really saw what I was doing and the choices I was making, I think. Whereas I think before it was just a bit, I think maybe just being in that like denial stage where I was just like, you know, it's fine. Like, it's how I am. It's kind of how I'm built. It's how, you know, I'm just not interested in food as much. Like, I kind of like brush it off. But I think by that point and just seeing how other people were and just then kind of making a conscious decision of like, oh no, actually. So I think it did help me get to a turning point of like, actually, I want something different. It did not set me on the track of getting there. I don't think it might have brought my weight up a tiny bit, but it didn't. I don't think I learned lots of good behaviors. And it was after that admission that then it took another good, like, I don't know, 5 years to then find some kind of balance with it all and like other different forms of treatment and trying different things. But it's still a very weird thing to think about and think about some of the things that would happen on that ward and how like dynamics would play out and things.
It sounds really traumatic, that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's one of the things I kind of don't think in detail very much of. And I think being anywhere for any amount of time, like there's always like random funny things that happened. Like I remember, we would watch like scary movies at 2 a.m. if we couldn't sleep, and like just like there would be like all these like random funny things. I remember, I don't know, there was like, and I think you just focus on the levity within a very like bizarre situation. And then I remember going, but again, because it's quite a punitive model, and then you have to like earn your rights to have privileges. So then can you go on a walk around the grounds, and the grounds were beautiful. And then that was like the first thing. And then could you go and do occupational therapy? And then I remember, but that was something that I was like, okay, yes, great, I can be off the ward with like not well, I think maybe I would have a member of staff that would come with me, but then I did some pottery and I did some painting, and that would be really funny because you would be with like lots of people from different psych wards, so not just the eating disorder ward. And that was kind of, I don't know, people were nice and interesting, and it was kind of funny. There were like some weird jokes, and it was, it was bizarre. There were some like nice bits in it, and I think when I look back, I think of, there'd be some characters and it would be funny, and people were nice, and we would have funny jokes. And it was bizarre, but it wasn't, although it was like a very, looking back, it's a dark spot within that whole year. Was like not a great year for sure. But like there were definitely, like I look at that year and there were definitely some like funny things, and I still have some of the pottery things that I made in that year that like I've got, and paintings that I did that are in my, like there's a painting I did that's in my friend's bathroom now. So it's kind of like those kind of things are like kind of funny, and that's kind of what I think about more so than some of the things that were really, really grim and distressing. And obviously sometimes they involved me directly, but a lot of the time, in terms of what distressed me the most, I think would be when other people were struggling so much, and it wouldn't necessarily be like at the dining room table. There was a lot of self-harm that happened, which was definitely not part of my experience. So I think I was really shocked by that. And it would be very severe. And I think that's where I saw the contagion effect the most. I know you mentioned that earlier. And I think it did certainly happen with food type behaviors, but the self-harm was on a different level. And there were a couple of people who that was a real challenge and problem for. And I think I remember being really distressed by some of that. And there was and without going into too much detail, because it's just so, there were things that were just so grim and so distressing in terms of what other people were doing, and you can't unsee some of those things. And that's not necessarily, although it's a part of their eating disorder maybe, or something that's comorbid with their eating disorder, it felt very extreme and very different to my experience. But it was certainly a difficult year. I think it definitely sunk in. I think the element of like institutionalization and like kind of you're so embedded into this routine at that point, and then also being told what you can do and what you can't do all the time, and being told about who you are a lot of the time in front of like a whole room of people would always be something that always kind of comes back to me a little bit. So I think now I'm quite sensitive and defensive when people will tell me things about my personality. So I can, if you've got feedback on my work, I'm here for it. I can take it. It's great. I'm all for it. I think I can take that feedback quite well. If you have something to say about my personality, or like if I'm, you're being really perfectionistic about this, like that it just hits the nerve like nothing else. Because I think I was told that for so many years in different forms, in different ways, in terms of how I was behaving, or I don't know, it really just triggered something in me. I think just being told that I was a problem in a different way for like a different reason, I think was something that just took a long time, and I think I'm still working through that in some ways, which is kind of strange. But it was a big year.
It sounds like a very pathologizing experience too, that you were made to feel like there was something really wrong with you on different psychological levels too, like the eating disorder, but also people calling you out for other things within your personality.
Right. Yeah. So I think that was hard. And I think then what was hard after that was then trying to, because by that point I was 23, most of my friends had finished uni, were starting their jobs, and I was like, okay, well I need to start from scratch here, but I don't know now where I start and where do I go from here. And it all felt like I had to just build from scratch. And I think that was hard, because then it was like thinking like, well, it then became a bit difficult in terms of thinking like, what's the point of like keeping on this road? And so I had to, that was something I had to really focus on, and that was challenging. But I think it's interesting how things unfolded, and I think as my life kind of became fuller, I think it became easier to let go of some of the eating things.
How did you start to have that experience? Like, how did you start to have a fuller life when you came out of that stint in the hospital?
It's a good question. One, I think I was always very lucky. I've always had a really good friendship network, and I've got a supportive family. And I think I started dating someone quite soon after leaving hospital, I seem to remember. And he was just very positive, very upbeat. And I think he actually probably played a bigger part than I would have given him credit for at the time, certainly. But I think that was important in terms of thinking, okay, well, let's try this and let's try that. And also not having really huge expectations of what would be feasible, because after inpatient, I still had to go to day patient after that. But I think, having people around me who are very positive and having the right level of expectations, so not just having like no expectation that I can't do anything, but also not expecting that I was going to suddenly do everything in one go. And then just thinking about ideas and trying different things. And I did a couple of internships that I had a nice balance with, not so I wasn't working full time. I would do a couple of days, might have been even a couple of afternoons a week, probably at the beginning, probably balanced with day patient, and then building from that. And then the big question then for me was whether I go to university or not. I was the only person I knew that hadn't gone to university of all my friends, more or less. So then thinking do I go? And then so I was like, well, let's kind of why not? And again, that's where my friendship network just really came in and was just very supportive around it, and just being give it a go, see if it's fun, do this, do that, and just kind of making it feel like I wasn't this disaster case that I think I was beginning to really feel by that point. And I think that just really lifted me out. And I was like, well, you know what, I will give it a go. I can have a fresh start. And I've always loved a fresh start, especially like all through the eating disorder thing. It's like, okay, well, like when this happened, I can try again and like get things back on track. And I think that's always been a bit of a feature. And so when I was 24, I started a psychology degree at Bath. And the first term I hated. I was living in halls. I was older than everyone else. I found it really hard to make friends, and I was like, oh, I don't really know if I like studying anymore. And I thought academic, like schoolwork, was something I was good at, and I just was like, oh no, I don't know this. It was awful. And then so by the time I'd done my first term at university, I had to have like a checkup back at the hospital, and then they were like, okay, hospital waiting list, here you go. And I was like, oh no. And I was just like, psychologically, I was like, I cannot put myself through another like inpatient stint. I just can't emotionally go through that again. Like that would be the worst. And this is definitely not recommended, but it worked for me. It was the right decision for me at the time, is that I then decided that I was going to go away. I was like, I'm not going to go to inpatient. I'm going to do a organized tour in Southeast Asia. And my meals will all be accommodated for in this like package tour thing. I like Asian food, and like, let me just do it, and it will be fun. It will be like my inpatient, but like on my own terms. And for me, it worked. Because that's what I wanted and what I needed. And like, you know, just had a good time. And then I came back, and I think I was again like ready to like give uni a go again. And then just pushed myself to make some friends. I had a job, made some friends with people that I was working with, so a bit more similar to me in age. And then for me with the eating, it's always been easier to eat with other people, and then kind of like do that fake it till you make it type thing, in terms of like, oh, well, if that's what they're doing, I want to be normal so I can do what they're doing. And I want to be part of things. I've always been a social person, so I've not liked the isolation part that will come with an eating disorder. So actually like pushing myself in the deep end in that way was helpful. And again, that's where like friends at home were really like incredible, and like, you know, like teaching me to cook various things and trying different things with me. And it's interesting, like it, and I'm sure a lot of my friends have had interesting relationships with food, but they would never show that in front of me, especially at that kind of time. And so really kind of modeled for me like a free relationship with food, or as close to that as you can imagine. So I think that was really helpful. And so like things started to get, you know, reasonably back on track. You know, they weren't great, but they were better. And I kind of got more into uni and had some more friends at uni as well, which was nice. And then I went to America for the first time and did a placement in Boston, which I really enjoyed. But I didn't cope very well with the transition. So with like moving somewhere else where had got a bit of a routine, I had a bit of a relapse at that point. But then I think I got to Christmas, and I think there was a conversation about like, oh, maybe do you think you should go home because you're not doing very well? Again, that was enough at that time, because my life had started to get bigger, and I was excited about things again, and was like getting into things that I was like, you know what, I don't want this to come in the way of me being in America. That this is like it felt at the time definitely like a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity. I didn't want something like the eating thing to get in the way of that. And I knew what would happen. I knew that I would come back, I would end back in inpatient. And I was just like, I just can't again emotionally go through that again. So it just pushed me then to be like, okay, well, what is it that I need to do? And I was in the States with two really great girls who I'm still friends with today. And like we just had, like, they were really good. And I think I had to just be a bit more open with them. And we kind of figured it out, you know, we kind of worked it through. And like, I, again, wouldn't say I like had completely recovered or anything, but I just did a lot better. And then yeah, I came back, did my final year at uni, but things were just felt a lot. I just felt like I was in control of my life again by that point, where I think probably up until the age of 18, I felt very much in control of like what was going on, and I felt happy with my situation. And then things kind of took a nosedive after then. But then it was kind of by the time I was in my fourth year of uni and my undergrad, I was like, I kind of felt I could see a future and I could see a direction. So then it just felt a lot easier to there wasn't enough time or space for the food thing to really take hold again in the same way. It was still there, but it just didn't factor in as much. And then after that, I went back to the US and did my master's over there.
Were you already studying body image at this point? Did you know you wanted to do that, or?
No, not at all. So actually, I did a psych degree, and then for my placement, I ended up doing a placement looking at social emotional development in underprivileged young people in Boston, which was perfect, and I really enjoyed it. But actually, before that, I had like lots of psychology undergrads. So I did toy with the idea of, do I want to become a clinician? And I was like, I remember there being a placement at a different inpatient hospital in London. I remember just thinking about it. And I remember talking to someone at the university being like, oh, do you think like I can do this? And I think it kind of got, I can't remember how it came up that I was like, no, you shouldn't really be doing that. But it got to that point, and I think it would have been a terrible decision to have done that at that point. But anyway, and then at that point, I was like, it didn't really feel like a good fit. I was still, even in my fourth year of university, I was still not well. Like I was so much better than I had been in the previous, I don't know, however many, like 7-8 years, maybe even longer. But I was still like, things were still not amazing. I was still, I don't know if I was seeing someone at that point or not, but like, things weren't, I wasn't recovered, put it that way. But then when I went to do my master's, my master's was in human development and education. And actually it's very, like the US system and the UK system are quite different. So it felt very freeing to I cross-registered for loads of different classes. I was doing like leadership classes. I was working, did stuff at the School of Public Health. I just did a whole range of classes that felt I was like interested in, and I think that was such a formative year for me, because I think it was the first time that I felt like it really felt like there was something exciting happening, and I had really, it was only a year master's, but I made some really strong, good friendships. I felt like I was surrounded by people who energized me, and I was so focused, and I think that's where. And I was seeing someone when I was there, because I was so worried, because the last time I went to America, I had such a bad dip that I was like, no, this is not happening again. So I remember as soon as I got there, I was like, okay, well, what do I need to do to see someone here so that doesn't happen again? Because I just didn't want to mess that up.
So a therapist, you found a therapist?
Yeah, so like through the university. So, and who was great, actually. She was really good. And then I cross-registered, and then there's, I don't know how familiar you are with Bryn Austin and her team at Harvard Striped, but I met with Bryn to speak with her about what she did in terms of eating disorder prevention, just more out of curiosity more than anything else. And then she had a series of like guest lectures and things that I was like, oh, I can go across the river and like listen to this. It's kind of interesting. It's a bit different to like what most of my classes are. And I just kind of wanted to be like, I was interested. It wasn't something that I was like running to work on, but I was interested. And then I did a couple of the lobby days at DC with the Eating Disorder Coalition and
lobbying for eating disorder legislation.
Yes, exactly. And just found that really powerful. And I think through that year, the space for the eating disorder had got like smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think it was, again, the best year I'd had for such a long time. And then I was going to these series of talks that Bryn was putting on through Harvard Striped, and then Philippa Deirdrick came and gave a talk on what she's doing at the Centre for Appearance Research in partnership with Dove and the Dove Self Esteem Project. And I went to that, and I listened, and I actually wasn't going to go. It was one of those weird things where it was like finals time. It was across the river. I had assignments I hadn't finished, and I was like, oh, should I go over to this? I'm like, I can't really be bothered, but it sounds really interesting. Like, oh, don't I? And then decided at the last minute that, oh yeah, no, I'm going to go, and I flew across on my bike, and then ran into this seminar room or whatever it was, and very bedraggled, and sat right at the front, really keen, but mess. And I just was really blown away by Philippa's presentation and the work that she does on body image and the collaboration between business and community partners. So she was talking about a project with the World Association for Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, which is the largest nonprofit dedicated to girls and young women in the world, and then how partnering with the Dove Self Esteem Project, they're able to implement evidence-based body image curriculum globally, which just sounded huge. And it just felt really exciting. And I think it kind of fitted with some of the classes that I'd been doing. So I'd been doing classes at the business school, and I'd done classes in public policy and in education, international education policy, and it kind of all seemed to like gel together. So yeah, I was just like really swept away with this presentation and this work that she was doing, and then spoke to her at the end of the talk and just was like, what do I need to do to work with you? How does that work? And I think that's one of the things I've always been a bit shameless with, that kind of thing, and just was like, I don't really have anything to lose. I had a couple of ideas of what I wanted to do, but this just seemed to be on a completely different level to some of the other things that I had been looking at. And then, as the story goes, she gave me a 3-month contract at the Centre for Appearance Research to work on that project with the World Association for Girl Scouts and Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. And then that turned into, a 3-month contract turned into a 6-month contract, which turned into a year's contract eventually. And then I ended up doing my PhD with Philippa. And then now I'm still at the Centre for Appearance Research, and I'm a research fellow. And the partnership with the Dove Self Esteem Project and the Centre for Appearance Research has gone from strength to strength over the years, all led by Philippa. And so now there's a partnership, there's a number of different partnerships, there's a whole portfolio of different projects that go on. But what I'm involved in is that there's a partnership with UNICEF now through the Dove Self Esteem Project. And so there's a couple of different global international projects. So there's a project with UNICEF in India that a couple of my colleagues are working on. There's a partnership with UNICEF in Brazil, which again, another couple of my colleagues are working on. And then there's a partnership with UNICEF in Indonesia. And so we've got, which I'm working on. So I'm leading a project looking at developing a school-based body image lesson that's going to be integrated into UNICEF's life skills education. So it will be part of their curriculum, so kind of social emotional development, but having a dedicated lesson on body image that hopefully will reach a large number of young people, so adolescents. So we're kind of looking at age 12 to 15, adolescents across Indonesia. And then there's also a project that one of my colleagues is leading, designing a chatbot with Girl Effect. So these are really huge, exciting projects. Like the scale is unbelievable, and in terms of the creativity and the scope that we have for different things, like in terms of like designing a chatbot like that, just seems like it's not typical academic research, right? Like it feels very, very exciting, and we get to learn from lots of different stakeholders. So like, everyone brings something different to the party. Learning lots of different things from UNICEF and how UNICEF operate, and then from Girl Effect and how they operate, and then obviously then what Dove bring to the table and their perspective on things. So it's a really exciting portfolio of projects. I think it's a dynamic team to work with, and I think it feels very much like the right place to be right now. And I think it's far enough away from the eating sort of stuff, although like body image, obviously there's that relationship, but where it just feels it's not, I think I would find it hard to do. I think maybe now might be okay, but at the beginning, I think I would have found it hard to do like eating sort of specific research, but doing like body image research at scale just feels exciting and new. I think it feels quite separate to like my journey and experience in many ways.
Yeah, I'm so curious to like get into a little bit this idea of body image and sort of the breadth of it. Because I think that we were talking a little bit offline about how I've noticed in certain circles, and I think this is maybe just a very small circle of people that are about health at every size and body liberation and sort of working to make eating disorder treatment more inclusive. There's this movement to like stop talking about quote unquote body image in eating disorder treatment and start talking about internalized weight stigma, to kind of, as I've read it, it's like people want to swap those terms one for one, right? To talk about internalized weight stigma instead of talking about quote unquote body image. And I'm nervous about that, right? I mean, of course, I think talking about internalized weight stigma is super important, and naming it as that and saying like fat phobia, weight stigma, like fear of fat, that is a big piece of eating disorder treatment that often gets left out, like the cultural fat phobia, the cultural stigma on fatness is super important to talk about. And making that the only thing to focus on seems like it's leaving out a lot of people's experiences, including like your experience where your eating disorder started not for any sort of body image related reasons or weight stigma related reasons, and you had thin privilege to start, but it started because of initially, it sounds like because of money, right? Because of like not having the money to eat lunch and, trying to save money and by walking more, and like that maybe set the stage. There's a lot of research showing that having an energy deficiency for whatever reason can set the stage for an eating disorder, right? And I know a number of clients for whom that was true, where it started not because of any weight stigma, but because of an energy deficiency created by other means, trauma, deprivation, those sorts of things. And like that all does play into body image too, right? So I think it's maybe broader than just the weight stigma piece. And I wonder I wonder what your thoughts are on all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting. And I think what's interesting in the work that we do on body image is that while it's related to eating disorders, we look at it for its own right, in its own terms. So looking at body image as how people think and feel about the way their body looks and functions, and then in turn how they behave towards their body. So we know poor body image is a risk factor for eating disorders, certainly. As you say, it wasn't a huge factor within my eating disorder experience, but it's certainly a big risk factor from the evidence we see for, when we're looking at these trends, because I think that's what body image research, a lot of it can be about looking at trends. What are the risk factors for poor body image? What are the outcomes for poor body image? And I think that's a really important piece. So we have this how we are looking at body image in terms of how people are thinking and feeling about the way their body looks and functions. And that's not limited to the weight and size it's not limited to weight and shape, right? It can be about other facets of your appearance. So it could be about your skin color, it could be about your complexion. And I certainly look at it in that more holistic way. So it's more about your appearance. And then actually, if we look at the outcomes on just poor body image, there is still this whole host of negative health and life outcomes from poor body image alone, aside from eating disorders. So eating disorder can be one negative health outcome, but also so could anxiety, depression, also could be lots of other kind of poor health behaviors in terms of maybe an increased risk of smoking, of drinking, of not using sun protection, but like all of these kind of other health behaviors. And then some of the other things in terms of like how people opt out of life activities because of body image anxiety, right? So they're not engaging in school, at work in the same way because of that anxiety, maybe not wanting to draw attention to themselves perhaps, or not, because of that like insecurity with how they look. So, and that's separate to the disordered eating element. So yeah, it's interesting. I can see why some people might be talking about that internalized weight stigma within an eating disorder context, but I think how I think about body image is a lot broader than that, and not just limited to eating disorders.
Right, because it has so many other impacts. And I know you mentioned that you do research, that your organization has these research initiatives in different countries, Indonesia, Brazil, and India, and that you mentioned before we started the recording that one thing that you're looking at in that research is colorism and the effect of, I'm curious even how you define colorism and then how you see it showing up in people's body image and sort of the ways that it affects behavior in those populations that you've studied.
Sure. So, colorism is broadly defined as like prejudice and discrimination based on skin shade. So the shade of the color of your skin, and there's this like skin shade hierarchy whereby people of color with lighter skin are afforded privileges in life in a way that people of darker skin shades are not. And actually there's some in a similar way, like you could draw a parallel with weight stigma in some ways, in terms of it's a social construct that has and a form of oppression that has bearings on how people feel about their own body and their own appearance. So, and it's very real, and the roots and the history of it are hugely nuanced and contextual. So it depends where you're looking in the world. So if you're looking at India, for example, you've got that history of like British colonialism. If you're looking at colorism in America, and that's where a lot of the research on colorism comes from, you've got slavery and how slavery impacts how people of color are treated and segregated. So how that all plays out, and just kind of to be very quick and brief with it, but thinking about with slavery, and then you would have the enslaved people who had lighter colored skin would be in the house doing the lighter work, whereas people with darker colored skin would be out working in the fields. It's complex, and I would urge people to read up on some of that history, because I think I don't want to butcher it now, but it's contextual, but it's very deeply ingrained. There's also with things with India, you've got like the caste system. So there are other things that are at play, but it's where in society people are treated differently based on their skin shade, and there's a light skin shade privilege among people of color. And it's how, I think the other important thing to say is it's both, so it's obviously related to racism, and it's kind of how like anti-blackness comes into play among communities of color, but it's colorism is experienced. So a person of color could experience colorism from a white person, so the differentiation of how a white person would treat a light-skinned person versus a darker-skinned person, but then it also happens within group. So among communities of color, how people are then treated differently, and then also then how that plays into beauty standards. So you have people looking at how this plays out for women, and how women are seen as more attractive when they have lighter colour skin, and how that plays out with global appearance beauty standards that have a disproportionate impact on women and people who present as in that way. So I think it's a huge system of oppression that doesn't get as much attention that I think it warrants. I think people are starting to look at it more now, but I think so with those projects that I mentioned with UNICEF, within each country we're working with local partners, so academics and collaborators in country. So it's kind of, again, what comes up and what we're told that's really culturally relevant, because we're trying to make our programs culturally relevant to these places, right? And so that's why we're working with these people, and that's again what's coming up. And it's like, this is something that's really important to young people, is how they feel about their skin shade because of how it plays out in society. So yeah, I think it's something really important. I think it's been overlooked a lot, and I think that's probably a product of how body image work has played out, where the leading places of body image research are US, UK, Australia, right? And it's like the field of eating disorders, it's a very white field in terms of like who's doing the research, and so I think then broadening this conversation out to thinking of how societal appearance standards play out for different populations. There are different factors that we need to consider over and above weight stigma and like an ideal of thinness.
And they can be probably entangled with one another too, right? I can imagine, and I know that in the US at least, I have heard from people of color from various backgrounds that they feel oppressed and pressured to meet colorist standards of beauty, and they also feel oppressed and pressured to meet weight stigmatizing standards of beauty. And that when we think about the roots of white supremacy and fat phobia as well, right? Like Sabrina Strings talks about in Fearing the Black Body, it's like it all kind of does go back to this anti-Blackness and this construction of a fake hierarchy of bodies in order to justify the enslavement of some bodies by others.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. I think it's how these things intersect, and I think that and how they layer up for people, and I think it's just really important to think about, and how it's relevant for people in different ways, and then also like in the same way with weight stigma, we have diet culture, and lots of like dieting products, dieting companies. In the same way, we've got skin lightening products and beauty companies selling fairness creams and that kind of thing, and that's also a huge huge industry in certain markets. So again, it's not something that's just an internal psychological, like, oh, I don't like the color of my skin. It like there's a reason for that, and it's huge.
And how can you, I know this is probably an ongoing question that you're working on as you're developing these programs, but like, how can you start to address that? And how can you give, these adolescents, in the case of the programs you're working on, like tools to push back against that, against this system of beliefs that is so much bigger than them and bigger than all of us, bigger than everyone, like the system that they're being indoctrinated into, that all of us have been indoctrinated into at some level. How do people start to be resilient to that or to question that and push back against that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And I think there's been years of much more established researchers than me looking at this and how to design the best type of programs and the most effective types of programs and in what settings. So the work that we're doing is very much an adaptation of things that already are known to work. So things like defining the ideal and understanding where that ideal comes from. So just being able to name that actually this ideal is not something that's just out of the blue. It's like it's from these systems of oppression, and it's from and then it's kind of that idea of cognitive dissonance, and from the Body Project with Eric Stice and Carolyn Becker is the idea of like, well, who's really profiting from this whole situation? Is it me, like not liking my skin color or not liking my weight or shape, or is it business or advertising or whatever being like, this is they're profiting off my insecurities? Who is gaining, who's benefiting? And if it's not me, why am I still buying into this, and why am I still investing my time, energy, money on trying to pursue something that, one, is probably unrealistic to achieve? I mean, I can't change my skin color by and large, and I can't change my weight by and large, especially not in a sustainable way. It's teaching that critical thinking there and really kind of pushing that cognitive dissonance to be like, actually, what am I buying into and why, and who's benefiting from it? So that's typically a big piece of body image intervention programs. Media literacy also comes into play. So just like really understanding all the editing that goes into imagery, the selection process. And it's one of those things where I think sometimes we jump and think like, oh, we all kind of know it. But I think to actually push and see all the different levels of change. So we see it on traditional media, but now we're seeing it on social media, and like really understanding that and critiquing it and kind of exploring why people are doing it, what's the benefit for them, and just having that level of what we would call critical media literacy is really useful, because again, I think it's easy to assume people have it now, but it's so easy to forget, right? It's so easy when you're scrolling through Instagram, you don't always have that media literacy hat on to be like, this is a highlight reel, this is everyone's like best picture, this is been edited with 3 different apps. So that typically is a part of a program. And then depending on how long the program is, right? So a lot of the time it's useful to scaffold how to respond to weight-based teasing if you hear it, how to respond to appearance comments that we know are destructive. How do you break that spiral of comparison? You kind of want to normalize it. Like, we all compare our appearance because we all compare everything, right? It's a kind of a human nature thing. It's part of the human condition. But how do you, once you catch yourself in that spiral, how do you break yourself out of it? So there are lots of different techniques that people use, and it depends, again, the scope of the program, how long the program is. So there's also different types of program that will really focus on really engaging people in functionality and what their body can do, and so there's some programs that really focus just on sport and movement, and then being like, so I think maybe to promote a sense of agency around your body as well. I think sometimes you can lose that, and to promote that and thinking about all the wonderful things your body can do. There's a program by Jessica Oliva in the Netherlands who focuses a lot on positive body image and body functionality, and her intervention work is very much focused on thinking about all the things your body can do, not just limited to physical movement, but also to your sensations and senses, so like touch and sight and smell, and how you interact with people, and how valuable your body is as a mode of communication. And And I think it's just like to really foster that appreciation of your body and thinking about your body in a different way beyond it just being an object of desire or just something to be looked at in some way. So there's lots of different mechanisms that people use, and there's lots of, everyone's kind of testing and stress testing, like what exact mechanism works best and for whom and in what format.
And it's so individual too, right? Like, I mean, I can imagine, for me, the idea of appreciating my body for what it can do has actually been really liberating, because even though I have some chronic illnesses that I live with, I also have an appreciation for like how my body allows me to like breathe and see and touch and be here in the world and communicate and, do this podcast and all of the rest, right? But I think for some folks who are disabled or who have a disability in some way, like, someone who can't see, for example, and then hearing about an intervention that is focused on the beauty of sight, it's like, well, that doesn't apply to me. And that makes people feel sometimes left out, I think. So sort of tailoring the interventions to like the specific community, I think is probably important too.
Yeah, and to say on that with that functionality piece, it's the idea is to look at all of the different elements of what your body can do. So although you might not be able to do some, if you're a wheelchair user, for example, like running is not going to maybe be applicable to you, but then it's like looking at that whole portfolio of things that your body can do. So it's not focusing on any one thing. So it's not focused on being like, okay, we have to focus on movement. It's like, okay, explore what it is that how your body enhances your life in some way, and whatever that is for you. And I think that's where, again, you kind of, you do tailor it, but it's not, the intervention is not as prescriptive as such to be like, okay, think about this one thing, because I think there is the understanding that obviously we all have different abilities and bodies are different, right? Like bodies are different, and how your body is at different life stages also is different. What you can do at 18 might be different to what you can do at 50. So we kind of want to make sure that things feel right and fit. So, but yeah, I can also see like different things work for different people at different times, right? So I think for some people, really understanding objectification and the influence of media and advertising and seeing sexualized images influences people, how you feel about your own body could be a light bulb moment for some people. But for some people that doesn't, they might know it, or it might not, that, they might know it on a rational level, but it might not really connect and click. But yoga practice might be something that feels really powerful in terms of connecting and like having a different kind of relationship with their body. So I think there is obviously a spectrum of like, we're all individual and different things work for different people. And I think the thing with body image research is that we're not experts in individual people's bodies. We're looking at trends and patterns. So one, like in terms of what causes body image concerns, poor body image, and then what the outcomes are. And these are trends, and it's not going to be the same for every single individual, but it's like en masse, this is what we see. And the same goes for intervention development, so, and how interventions work. So one intervention is not going to work for every single person in the same way, but we want to see on balance, does it work for this group of people? So does it work for adolescent girls in Indonesia? Does it work for adolescent boys in Indonesia? Does that exact same intervention work in a different cultural context? And what adaptations do we need to make? But it's looking at things on balance, because that's the idea behind research, right? Like you're looking at things at a layer back, because we're not clinicians, we're not doing things one-on-one, where you individualize things a lot more.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction to make too. And I think that's great for people to keep in mind, is like the way that research gets translated down to individual action. It may be different for different people, and it isn't going to work the same way for everyone. Even if you had, an individual adolescent girl in Indonesia that you were working with, and the program had been shown to be effective on the balance for a group of adolescent girls, it doesn't mean that one particular girl is going to have it resonate for her. It's going to be different. And that people, I think that's like a helpful thing to keep in mind too, as a patient, as a consumer of self-help or like help from clinicians and stuff too, is to think like, yeah, I might not be helped by this one particular modality. And I know for me, that's been very true. Like I went through a number of therapists before finding someone who clicked. And I have actually had different therapists at different times in life for different things. Like I had a very targeted CBT intervention for a phobia that was really helpful, but like that was separate from like a longer term trauma therapist. And the phobia intervention maybe wouldn't have worked 10 years before, because I wouldn't have been at the place to like resonate with it. So, I think it's helpful just to keep in mind, if you don't find something that clicks with you right away, that's okay. Like keep trying. And it also is not, I see this on social media a lot where people will feel like, something didn't work for them. And so it's trash and they want to trash it. Right. And like, I get that. I get, especially when it's coming from a place of feeling like you weren't included in the development of something. Like I get that feeling of needing to vent about it or wanting to draw attention to it and sort of like focus the attention of clinicians or people who do that kind of research on the missing elements and like maybe the white supremacy that's inherent in the model or the modality or something. And also recognizing that we're all different and that it's not like just because one thing didn't resonate for you doesn't mean that another thing won't, that there's something out there for you that will help, I think, and just to sort of keep trying.
Yeah, completely. And I think we all want quick fixes, right? Like we're all like, we want that with diet culture. We want that with how to heal our relationship with our body. And I get asked a lot, like many of my colleagues will also, in terms of like, okay, what are the evidence-based ways of improving our body image? Go like top 3. What do I need to do? And I can reel off a whole list of things that the evidence has shown on balance with a sample of, like, I don't know, like 100 people, 1,000 people, whatever. This is what has been found in this study. This is something so then we can say, there is some evidence behind yoga practice. There's some evidence behind critical media literacy, like there's loads of things that we can say there's evidence behind doing these things. But also you need to know yourself, right? You need to know what works and resonates for you. And also things are not going to happen overnight. If you've had a lifetime of having a really complicated relationship with your body, just like diversifying your feed on Instagram, which has an evidence base behind, there's been a study by one of my colleagues at Centre for Appearance Research and others who have shown like having diverse images of bodies on Instagram alleviates negative body image. It gives a boost to mood and to positive body image. So I think that's it's not a long-term sustainable thing in terms of what that study showed, but there's a bit of evidence behind it. But just doing that and then looking at that for 3 days is not necessarily going to completely overhaul and transform your relationship with your body, especially if you've had that long history of a very complicated and not kind relationship to your body. It's going to take effort and work and trying different things and repeat trying things. You have to keep at it, and it's not an overnight process. So I think there is that idea of like thinking about things on that individual level and like really kind of being in tune to yourself as well and what you feel like resonates with you, and then also being persistent and persevering with things, especially if you've had that long history.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I love how you put that. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you about this stuff forever. This is so fascinating, and your career and your life have all had such rich, interesting things happen and the things you're doing with body image research I think are fascinating. So can you tell people where they can learn more about what you're doing and your work and where to find you online and all of that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I could speak to you for ages before. It's been really enjoyable. So where you can find me on Instagram would be Nadia.Craddock. Then we have the podcast for the Centre for Appearance Research, which is called Appearance Matters. There's also a brand new Instagram for the Centre for Appearance Research, which is CAR, CAR_UWE. So just to see what the team are doing more broadly. And then I also have another podcast that I do with Honey Voss called The Body Protest, which is about body image, but it's not academic. It's a more wholesome conversation. It's a lot more informal, and it's lovely, and I'm very proud of it. So that's another avenue you can look.
That's great. We'll put links to those things in the show notes too, so people can find you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you so much again. This is such a great conversation. I love talking with you.
Yeah, I love talking to you too. Thank you so much for having me.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to Nadia Craddock for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you want some help healing your relationship with food, you can get support from me for free by going to christyharrison.com/strategies. There you can sign up for my email list and get my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message by sharing this episode and subscribing to the pod on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, whatever that may be. You can see all the places to subscribe at christyharrison.com/subscribe. That's christyharrison.com/subscribe. And if you leave us a nice rating and review in your podcast provider of choice, that is another great way to help new listeners discover the show, and I always really appreciate it. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, just go to christyharrison.com/257. That's christyharrison.com/257. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by ThredUp. ThredUp is the largest online thrift store with up to 90% off of your favorite brands. Get an exclusive offer of an extra 30% off your first order when you go to thredup.com/foodpsych. That's thredup.com/FOODPSYCH for 30% off your first order today. Terms apply. A big thanks, as always, to our editor and sound engineer, Mike Lalonde, our community and content associate, Vinci Chue, our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, and our transcriptionist, Mycroft Holmes, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Melissa Alam. Our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs. And I'm your host and producer, Christy Harrison. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched and remember to vote.